Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Welcome to today's side event. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Claire Denman. I'm the United Nations Officer at Christian Solidarity Worldwide, CSW. We're an international human rights organisation specialising in the right to freedom of religion or belief for all faiths and those of none. CSW, together with the organisations Article 18, Middle East Concern and Open Doors International, welcome you to this side event on the situation of Christians in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where we'll be looking at the legal protections versus the lived realities in the context of the fourth cycle of the UPR process. This event will be in English, with the exception of one panellist who will have interpretation from the panel. So if you're struggling to hear, then I would recommend you use your mics on your desks and just adjust the volume to be able to listen clearly. You may also need this function as we start, as we're going to open with a statement from Professor Mai Sato, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Iran, who joins us via a pre-recorded video statement, as she unfortunately couldn't be with us here today in person.
Thank you for having me today. The situation of Christians in the Islamic Republic of Iran is a matter of serious concern that demands our continued attention. This side event during the fourth UPR cycle provides a timely opportunity to examine the lived realities of Christian communities in Iran. I regret that I cannot be with you in Geneva today, but I am pleased this crucial discussion is taking place. I first want to thank CSW for organising this event, along with the co-sponsors Article 18, Middle East Concern and Open Doors International. The work of these civil society organisations has been invaluable in documenting human rights violations and maintaining consistent advocacy for religious freedom. As Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, I want to note that my mandate and other special procedures mandate holders have raised concerns about the persecution of Christians in the Islamic Republic of Iran through communications to the government of Iran in 2011, 13, 18, 2020. The violations reported in these communications mirror the very issues that presenters at this event will be discussing today. The violations concerning the Christian communities in Iran that have been documented by my mandate report multiple breaches of Iran's obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. They include rights to liberty and security, to freedom of thought, conscious religion or belief, to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly, physical and psychological integrity, privacy, as well as the principle of non-discrimination and the rights of persons belonging to minorities. I strongly encourage all stakeholders to continue sharing information with my mandate about the situation of Christians and other religious minorities in Iran. Your submissions ensure that these issues remain visible on the international agenda. As we proceed with this event, I note that the distinguished panelists include those who have first-hand experience of these challenges. The presence today of both civil society representatives and those directly affected by these violations demonstrates the vital partnership between advocacy organizations and the communities they serve, a partnership that is essential for achieving meaningful change. So thank you for inviting me to this event, and I wish this event a success. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. I'd now like to turn to the panel in the room, and I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Kataza Gondwe. Dr. Kataza has advocated for freedom of religion or belief for over 20 years as Joint Director of Advocacy and the team leader for the Africa Middle East team at CSW. She has worked on country and thematic FORB-related issues across the world. She's also written articles on FORB-related issues for UK newspapers and for the Berkeley Forum, and she's currently a member of the Africa Advisory Council on International Freedom of Religion or Belief Alliance, Africa Vision Working Group, and is on the URFBA Council of Experts as well. Dr. Kataza, I was wondering if you could share with us more about Iran's narrative for FORB provisions in its national report to the UPR, and also the legal framework for FORB in Iran and the situation for recognised and unrecognised Christian groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. The national report submitted by the Islamic Republic of Iran for its fourth Universal Periodic Review begins by emphasizing that the country's, quote, foundation was not based on ethnic and religious structural conflict. The document goes on to confirm that the majority of the population follows Islam, and the constitution formulated following the 1979 revolution establishes an Islamic republic founded on the Twelver Jafari school, a principle it describes as eternally immutable, which guides the formulation of legislation, but does not reflect the nation's diverse cultural and religious heritage. The Constitution accords respect to other Islamic schools, while Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Judaism are recognized, ostensibly allowing these religious communities to practice their respective rights in personal matters. Article 14 of the Constitution states that the government and all Muslims are duty-bound to treat non-Muslims in conformity with ethical norms and the principles of Islamic justice and equity, and to respect their human rights. And finally, Article 23 forbids the investigation of individuals' beliefs, adding that no one may be molested or taken to task simply for holding a certain belief. As a state party to the ICCPR, which it ratified in 1975 without reservations, and to other international legislation protecting the right to freedom of religion or belief, including the right to adopt a religion of belief of one's choice, Iran is under an international obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill this right in full for all within its jurisdiction. During the February 2023 Human Rights Council interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Iran's representative stated that this right should be, quote, respected and protected for all, and spoke of the need to ensure, quote, everyone can practice their religion or belief without fear of persecution or prejudice, and to embrace tolerance and diversity. This sentiment is echoed in the national report for the UPR, which proclaims that religious minorities are permitted to conduct their religious ceremonies freely. However, the realities for religious minorities are somewhat different. Several religions and beliefs, including the Baha'is, the Yatsanism, Mandaism, and atheism, are not recognized in the Constitution. And despite being the largest minority religious group in terms of numbers, the Baha'i community has experienced multiple pervasive and sustained violations since 1979 that are increasingly viewed as constituting crimes against humanity. In fact, both unrecognized and recognized minority religious and belief communities can experience restrictions when attempting to exercise their right to freedom of religion or belief, arising from official antipathy, societal hostility, and the enactment of laws designed to provide plausible deniability and to lend a figment of legitimacy to abuses of the rights of individuals and communities in violation of the ICCPR and even of the national constitution. Particularly problematic for the Christian community is the fact that their faith is viewed by the authorities through the prism of ethnicity rather than religion. Christians belonging to ethnicities other than the Armenian and Assyrian people groups are viewed with suspicion, as are those from these backgrounds who espouse a more evangelical form of worship. Also notable is the assertion made in Iran's national report that approximately 300 churches are operating across the country without hindrance. The number of churches may be a reasonable approximation. However, not all are operating without hindrance during the reporting period, as several that were closed during the COVID pandemic are yet to be reopened. For example, on the inside of this joint report, the back inside cover shows a picture of the Anglican Church of St. Simon the Zealot in Shiraz, which has been closed to its community since 2020. Most of the 300-odd churches predate the 1979 revolution. Therefore, it would have been more enlightening if the Iranian authorities had also divulged how many of the churches are still able to function as worship centers. In addition, knowing how many of these churches were constructed after the Islamic Republic was established would serve as an important indicator of the situation of freedom of religion or belief in the country. As you've heard, one of our panelists will be relating personal testimony that includes violations, harassment, and abuses experienced by her family and by her community, despite belonging to a recognized religious community. The faith of converts to Christianity who come from a Muslim background and currently constitute the largest proportion of Iran's Christian community is not recognized by the authorities. In fact, it is also the target of extreme hostility, marking adherents out for intimidation, arbitrary arrests and detention, physical and psychological mistreatment, and lengthy or cyclical convictions and prison sentences. While apostasy is not codified as a crime, it is effectively criminalized, as converts from Islam are frequently charged with crimes under several articles of the amended Islamic Penal Code. The national report itself makes mention of Article 499 as amended, which it states was formulated, quote, with the aim of criminalizing any spread of hatred, insult, and violence against Iranian peoples, divine faiths, or Islamic religions. And this is being used to target converts in particular at the moment. However, Article 500, which stipulates a sentence of between 1 and 3 years for alleged propaganda against the state, essentially a national security crime, is a charge most widely leveled against Christians. As amended, Article 500 penalizes receiving financial or organizational help from abroad with a sentence of up to 10 years, negatively impacting donations received by faith communities affiliated with global denominations and assistance rendered to individuals who are struggling financially. The theocracy also relies on charges such as blasphemy, and in the past, use has been made of ill-defined crimes that can encompass anything deemed undesirable by the state, such as spreading corruption on earth and waging war against God. With no set penalty, these wide-ranging crimes, punishments for these wide-ranging crimes can be ranged from a few months to execution. In a possible effort to contain conversion, the Iranian authorities forced churches to end services conducted in the Persian language, which is a national one, to stop holding meetings on Fridays, which is the national day off, and to not allow converts into their buildings. Only 4 Persian language churches now remain, and their members are obliged to prove that they were Christians before 1979, and the churches are not permitted to take in new members. Persian-speaking Christians are thus denied the right to practice their faith in community with others, as private gatherings or house churches are subjected to raids by the Ministry of Intelligence, during which attendees are subjected to mistreatment, including intimidation, seizure of property, arrests, excessive bail demands, judicial harassment, and ultimately prison sentences that are often extended by the inclusion of a term of internal exile. Another of our panelists will provide greater testimony of violations experienced as a convert to Christianity, despite guarantees in the ICCPR for the freedom to adopt a religion or belief of one's choice. Iran's national report also mentions equality of the public before the law and equal enjoyment of rights by the Iranian people, regardless of ethnicity, color, race, language, and etc., and says that this is one of the principles of the country's constitution. In practice, however, Christians do not enjoy equality before courts and tribunals, nor do they enjoy a fair and public hearing before competent, independent courts of law. Most are tried in revolutionary courts that are generally closed to the public and that fail to ensure due process, with many judges passing sentences predetermined by the Ministry of Intelligence. Iran's national report goes on to speak of removing discrimination and creating fair opportunities for all. However, there have been several instances of children of converts being unable to access higher education as their final certificates were withheld for refusing to take Quranic studies in order to progress. In January 2022, a precedent was set of double jeopardy in gross violation of Article 14.7 of the ICCPR, which prohibits the retrial of individuals on charges for which they have already been convicted or acquitted. Church leader Abdulreza Matthias Ali Hagnejad, who had just been released from prison, was rearrested on charges for which he had been acquitted on appeal in December 2014 by the Supreme Court after it had ruled that attending house churches and promoting Christianity should not be deemed as being actions against national security. Thus, the Christian community continues to be monitored and viewed with suspicion. It has been granted a pseudo-recognition with provisions in law that do not translate into reality. Unsubstantiated national security-related crimes, along with penalties for taking communion wine, gathering for prayer, Christmas celebrations, and even a picnic, effectively criminalize normal Christian practices and social activities, while restricting the freedoms of association, of expression, and the right to manifest one's religion or belief, even in private. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gondwe. Our next two panellists have been set up extremely well by you for their remarks. It gives me great pleasure to say that we do have two individuals who have lived this experience firsthand in Iran with us today, who will be sharing testimony. But before I introduce them, I just want to take the opportunity to highlight that the UPR is a really important opportunity to put the voices of Iranian citizens at the centre of discussions. When CSOs reach out to member states ahead of the UPR, especially those working with human rights defenders or victims of violations from countries of concern, I'd really urge you to listen to their recommendations and to use the UPR process as an opportunity to amplify their voices. While uncommonly utilised, I'd also encourage you to consider using the process to raise individual cases of concern too. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first testimony today, Amin Afshar Naradi, is that how you pronounce it? Naradi, sorry. He's an Iranian Christian convert who fled Iran after being sentenced to 15 years in prison for his religious beliefs and activities. He was first arrested at a Christmas party at our other panelist, Sabrina's family home, and his case was among those included in the millions of files of Tehran's judiciary leaked by hackers in 2024, which we'll hear about a bit later. So, Amin, I give the floor to you. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
سلام به همگی.
Hello everyone.
متشکرم واسه فرصتی که میتونم صحبت کنم.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
من امین افشار نادری هستم.
My name is Amin Afshar Naderi.
یک ایرانی مسیحی که به دلیل عضویت یا فعالیت مسیحی دو بار تو سالهای 2014 و 2016 توسط نهادهای امنیتی بازداشت شدم.
I'm an Iranian Christian who was arrested twice in 2014 and 2016 by Iranian security agencies due to my Christian faith and activities.
آن هم تو دوران ریاست جمهوری آقای روحانی که منشوری هم به اسم حقوق شهروندی به دستگاه مختلف ابلاغ کرده بود.
And these arrests happened during the presidency of Hassan Rouhani, who ironically had introduced Charter of Citizens' Rights.
در مجموع حدود 1 سال در زندان اوین تو بازداشت به سر بردم.
In total, I spent about 1 year in Evin prison.
بیشتر از 73 روز از اونو تو زندان انفرادی بودم.
During my time in prison, more than 73 days of which I spent in solitary confinement.
تحت فشارهای روحی و روانی قرار گرفتم.
I was subjected to psychological pressure.
تهدید شدم تا ایمانمو به مسیح انکار کنم.
And threats aimed at forcing me to renounce my Christian faith.
برای اعمال فشار بیشتر منو به سلولایی منتقل کردن که اعضای گروه داعش اونجا بودن.
To intensify the pressure, I was placed in cells with members of ISIS.
هدف این بود که از ترس جونم از عقیده خودم دست بکشم.
This was intended to make me fear for my life and abandon my beliefs.
این در حالیه که تفتیش عقیده بر اساس قانون جمهوری اسلامی ایران ممنوعه.
This is despite the fact that Iran's own constitution prohibits coercion of beliefs.
اولین باری که بازداشت شدم تو یک مراسم جشن میلاد عیسی مسیح تو کریسمس 2014 بود.
The first time I was arrested was during a Christmas celebration in December 2014.
بعد از مدت‌ها بازداشت در حالی که با وثیقه به طور موقت از زندان آزاد شده بودم، برای بار دوم دستگیر شدم.
After a lengthy detention, I was temporarily released on bail pending trial, only to be rearrested again.
بار اول که بازداشت شدم، ماموران امنیتی منو از خونه کشیش به خونه والدینم منتقل کردن، جایی که ما واسه مراسم کریسمس جشن گرفته بودیم.
During my first arrest, security agents took me from the home of a pastor who we were celebrating Christmas with and searched my parents' home as well.
اونا به کتاب مقدسی برخورد کردن که از ترکیه برای مطالعه خودم آورده بودم.
They found a Bible that I had brought with me from Turkey for my personal study.
این کتاب مقدس توسط ماموران بازداشت شد و به عنوان مدرک جرم ضبط و توقیف شد.
This Bible was seized as evidence of a crime by the agents.
بارها تو زندان درخواست داشتن کتاب مقدس رو کردم.
Later, while in prison, I requested Bible, explaining that I was a Christian.
و گفتم که بارها من به عنوان یک مسیحی حق دارم که کتاب مقدس رو داشته باشم.
I explained that I am a Christian and I had the right to access it.
واسه اینکه داشتن یک قرآن برای هر زندانی مسلمانی جزو حقوق اولیه اونها بود.
While the Quran was readily available to all prisoners,
اما بعد از مدت‌ها درخواست و پافشاری واسه داشتن یک نسخه کتاب مقدس به زبان فارسی، بالاخره روزی ماموران وزارت اطلاعات منو ملاقات کردن و با تمسخر بهم گفتن که
my repeated request for a Bible was denied for a long time until eventually an intelligence officer mockingly told me,
احمق هستی که همچین درخواستی داری؟
You're foolish to make such a demand.
ما تو رو به خاطر همین کتاب مقدس به اینجا آوردیم، بعد تو اینجا از ما درخواست کتاب مقدس میکنی؟
We brought you here because of the Bible and now you want us to give you one?
میخوام به شما بگم که نه فقط کتاب مقدس بلکه داشتن سایر کتب دینی مسیحیان هم جرم هستش.
I want to say that not only the possession of a Bible but also other Christian materials were also criminalized.
برای مثال داشتن یک سرودنامه که از اون برای انجام پرستش و اجرای موسیقی کلیسایی استفاده می‌کردم به عنوان مدرک فعالیت مجرمانه من تو حکم دادگاه ذکر شد.
For example, a songbook I used for worship and leading church music was cited in my court verdict as evidence of an illegal Christian activity.
و از اون به عنوان مسئولیت من به عنوان رهبری کلیسای خانگی مورد استناد قرار گرفت.
It was even used as a justification for accusation of my leadership role in the house church.
یکی از اتهاماتی که به خاطرش 10 سال محکوم شدم به زندان، اقدام علیه امنیت ملی به واسطه تشکیل کلیسای غیرقانونی خانگی و تبشیر مسیحیت صهیونیستی بود.
One of the charges I was sentenced to 10 years in prison for was acting against national security by forming an illegal house church and promoting Zionist Christianity.
تو گزارش‌های مربوط به من حتی نواختن موسیقی به عنوان ابزاری برای انحراف افراد تعبیر شده بود.
In reports about me produced by the interrogators, even playing music was described as a tool of misleading others.
این در حالیه که تو کتاب مقدس و تمام کلیساها موسیقی بخشی از پرستش محسوب میشه.
Despite the fact that music is universally recognized in Christian worship as a means of glorifying God.
برای بار دوم تو یک گردهمایی دوستانه در حال پیکنیک با دوستان دیگه مسیحیم دستگیر شدم.
The second time I was arrested, I was at a picnic with Christian friends.
وقتی از ماموران امنیتی درخواست حکم قضایی کردم،
When I asked the security agents to present an arrest warrant,
به جای ارائه حکم
instead of presenting their warrant,
اسلحه‌شون رو نشون دادن و به صورتم اسپری فلفل زدن و منو شدیداً کتک زدن.
They showed me their gun, they sprayed pepper spray in my face and beat me severely.
و منو با زور وارد خودروی خودشون کردن.
And they forced me into a vehicle.
تو زندان با آزارهای جسمی و روانی مختلفی مواجه شدم.
And while in prison, I endured physical and psychological abuse.
بارها تو برخورد با بازجوها و زندانبانها به صورت لفظی و عملی مورد توهین و تحقیر قرار می گرفتم.
On multiple occasions, I was verbally and physically humiliated by interrogators and prison guards.
به عنوان نمونه موضوع ختنه شدن مسلمانان و ختنه نشدن مسیحیان به ابزاری برای تحقیر جنسی من تبدیل شده بود.
For example, they used the issue of circumcision, a practice common among Muslims but not Christians, as a way to mock and degrade me sexually.
تو دوران بازداشت از یک سو هویت مسیحی منو منکر می شدن.
During my detention, they would deny my Christian identity.
و نمیخواستم بپذیرن که من یک مسیحی هستم.
And they treated me as they didn't want to accept me as a Christian.
از طرف دیگه رفتارشون با من طوری بود که به خاطر باور مسیحیم من نجس و ناپاک بودم.
But at the same time, they treated me as impure because of my Christian faith.
مثلا موقع انتقال من از سلول انفرادی با اینکه چشمای من بسته بود و جایی نمیدیدم لباس منو میگرفتن و میکشیدن تا از لمس مستقیم و نجس شدنشون پرهیز کنن.
For instance, when I was being transferred to and from the solitary confinement, even though I was blindfolded and couldn't see them, the guard would pull on my clothes to avoid physical contact with me.
اگه درب کلیسای ما رو تو منطقه شهرآرای تهران به روی ما نمیبستن،
if the doors of our church in Tehran's Shahrara neighborhood was not closed,
ما مجبور نمی‌شدیم که تو خونه ها جمع بشیم و شاید هیچ وقت این دستگیری ها اتفاق نمی‌افتاد.
we would not have had to gather in private homes and perhaps none of these would have happened.
وقتی اون کلیسا از پذیرش مسیحیان فارسی زبان منع شد،
when that church was banned from accepting Persian-speaking Christians,
با همکاری نمایندگان ایرانیان آشوری تو مجلس، کشیش آشوری کلیسا برکنار شد.
with the cooperation of the Assyrian representative in parliament, the Assyrian pastor of our church was dismissed.
ما برای عبادت چاره‌ای جز جمع شدن تو خونه‌های خودمون نداشتیم.
Therefore, we were left without options for communal worship.
این تجربه من به عنوان یکی از نمونه‌های هزاران مسیحی دیگه تو ایرانه که فعالیت دینی و عادی اونها توسط حکومت جمهوری اسلامی جرم انگاشته میشه.
So we were not left without option for communal worship unless we had to gather at homes. My experience are just one example among thousands of Iranian Christians whose ordinary religious activities are criminalized.
و آزادی اساسی اونها سلب میشه.
And their fundamental freedoms are stripped away by the Islamic Republic.
متشکرم از شما برای این وقت.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've heard from Mr. Afshar Naradi about the challenges faced by Christians who are not recognized, including Christian converts. But recognized Christians of Armenian and Assyrian descent also face constant threats of arrest and imprisonment for meeting together to worship. So our next panelist knows this only too well. Mr. Brina Bet Tamraz is an Iranian Assyrian Christian whose parents, Victor and Shamaran, were sentenced to a combined 15 years in prison for their religious faith and activities. Their church was forcibly closed and they fled Iran in 2020 after Shamaran was summoned to her 5-year sentence. Sabrina had already fled the country at this point, having been arrested and threatened with imprisonment and even execution if she failed to provide her interrogators with information about her parents' church. So Sabrina, it gives me great honour to give you the floor. Thank you.
I've recently read a story online about a Baha'i person who gave his testimony saying, during the court, the judge asked him if he is a Baha'i. He replied, "What's that has to do with my case?" The judge said, "I'm just personally interested to know." Then he replied, "Yes, I am a Baha'i." Judge gave him 5 years in prison just because he's a Baha'i. The man said, "Are we all criminal?" The judge said, "Yes, you're all spies." So 300,000 Baha'is in Iran are spies. The judge replied, "Yes, they are. Even my 1-year-old nephew. Well, maybe not now, but at some point he will be a spy." The Baha'i asked, "What if I change my religion, become a Muslim? Am I still a spy?" The judge looked at him with anger and shouted, "Shut up." As I was reading the story, I could resonate with that personally. I've been arrested, I've been interrogated, I've been accused of acting against national security simply because I was a Christian. I am from a recognized Christian minority in Iran, a Syrian. This means, at least on paper, practically, that we should be protected for our faith, that we should have certain freedom to express our faith, to go to church, to practice freely. And that cannot be further from truth. When I was 6 years old, my parents taught me the danger of being kidnapped from school. They never allowed me to go to school, come back home alone ever. When I was 8 years old, I witnessed the death of pastors and church leaders. I remember with my family, we went to the funeral of one of those pastors who had been murdered for his faith, thinking, when will Dad be buried? I remember going home to my mom crying because my dad has been arrested and interrogated. Our appointments, travels, trips being cancelled because Dad is not coming home from prison. And I remember being told, it's okay if Mom and Dad die. It's our faith, and we're going to keep strong and keep holding to our faith. When I became a teenager, my parents took their time and they taught us how to withstand interrogations, how to not cooperate, what to say and what not to say. In 2009, the age of 23, those lessons came handy. When I was expelled from university, held in only men detention center with no female officer being present, being interrogated for my faith. I wasn't a criminal. I didn't do anything wrong. I simply went to church, was practicing and living my church, my faith. This is not an experience that any Christian, that any human should endure. According to the Article 18 of International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and you've heard this before, that Iran has ratified, Christians, especially the recognized Christians, are allowed to share the faith, express the faith, and live as who they are. And that cannot be further from truth. I spoke to my father in prison, comforted my mother in hospital when her son was arrested from being at a picnic together with Amin. I said goodbye on phone to my brother before he had to submit himself to prison. And I had to stand and look at my family being stripped apart, our dignity, our faith, because of our Christian simple faith. I'm sure you've heard this, and I'm sure you're going to hear this again and again, that Christians are free in Iran. We've heard already that the Iranian representatives are going to say 300 churches are open and they can practice easily, freely. Since 2009, at least 10 Protestant, Assyrian, Armenian churches have been shut down. Since 2011, my faith as an evangelical, as a Protestant Christian, is considered a terrorism, Zionism, and an action against national security. More churches today are restricted and are not allowed to practice freely in their services. My father and Amin were arrested during the Christmas celebration in 2013. And 10 years later, still today, Christians are being arrested during the Christmas celebrations for celebrating their Savior's birthday. This year alone, more than 40 Christians were arrested. I was able to flee Iran. My parents were able to leave 2 years ago. But most of my other family, my brother included, are still home. Government is forcing Christians to leave the country, especially recognized Christians. You will hear about this joint annual report. This is a recent report that's been done with 4 different NGOs. And this report, a clergy deputy prosecutor said that there is no place for unaligned Christians in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I believe that. At the moment, there is no place for even recognized Assyrian, Armenian, Protestant churches, believers in Iran. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for those moving words, for sharing your story and that of your families too, and for many other Christians in Iran from recognized groups who, bearing the brunt of Iran's policies and campaign of violations against the religious minorities in the country. You mentioned the report, the annual report. So I'm wondering if we'll turn to our next panelist, who's going to share a little bit more about the findings of that report, which has just been released this month. So I'd like to introduce to you Mansour Borti, who's the Executive Director of Article 18, a London-based advocacy organisation dedicated to the promotion of religious freedom in Iran, with a focus on the rights violations against the Christian minority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues. It's a privilege to present the finding of the report, shedding light on Iran's systematic violations of freedom of religion and belief. I have to thank CSW and our partner organizations for helping us to produce this report, and also thank my unnamed colleagues who have spent countless hours searching through over 3 million files that provide significant insight, as highlighted in the report before you. The leaked judiciary files obtained through a hacker group whose credentials have been discussed briefly in the report have revealed the cases of over 300 Christians prosecuted in Tehran region alone between 2008 to 2023. These are not just numbers. When we talk about 300 plus Christians, they are stories of real people whose lives have been disrupted for their faith. Although these cases span over a decade, their significance is still profound. They serve as undeniable, irrefutable, and unbiased records of human rights abuses. At a time when the Iranian government often dismisses reports of repression as biased or fabricated, these files provide objective evidence that cannot be ignored. They demand to be documented, studied, and seriously addressed by the international community. The data affirms what countless victims like Amin and Sabrina have bravely testified to, that Iranian judiciary and security apparatus operate systematically to suppress the rights, religious freedom of Christians and other minorities. Today I will highlight only 2 I was intending to have 4 of them, but for interest of time, only 2 of the 10 indicators identified in the report before you, which exposes the depth of the repression. These indicators not only outline the tactics used by the Iranian government, but also emphasizes the urgent need for global action to hold them accountable. Firstly, it's a vilification of Christians as sects or security threats. The leaked files reveal that the Iranian judiciary systematically labels Christians, particularly Persian-speaking Christians and evangelicals, as members of a deviant sect or a security threat. They deliberately vilify those Christians, and it's not incidental, but a very calculated move to justify repression. The Christians who worship in house churches are often depicted as agents of foreign powers, while their peaceful religious activities are framed as attempts to undermine the Islamic Republic. This rhetoric, rooted in the unfounded paranoia, fosters an atmosphere of hostility that legitimizes repression. In just over an hour, in this very place and in this very room, a delegation of the Iranian government will present a different version of the reality into the situation of the Iranian Christians. An Iranian Assyrian parliamentary representative would probably say, we have 300 churches that are, quote unquote, operate unrestrictedly. I am here to say that this is far from the truth. Mr. Charlie Elvier, who would want us to believe that this statement is true, that over 300 churches operate unrestrictedly, is on record, both written and also on video. And the printed magazine, which I happen to have a copy of it here, the front cover of a magazine printed in Iran that quotes him saying evangelical Christianity or promoting Christianity is a detestable or hated thing. We cannot have somebody who considers a majority of Christian population, a global belief of Christians as hateful, to speak as a representative for all Christians. Evangelical churches are not hateful, they're not having a hidden agenda, they don't want to undermine the national security. In fact, years have proven that they seek the best of their countries and their nations. I'll move on to one of the other very sensitive topics, and that is criminalization of Bible as evidence of a crime. Another alarming revelation from these files, as also testified by Amin, is that Bibles and Christian literature are considered contraband and evidence of a crime. Since the dissolution of Iranian Bible Society in 1990, possession, sale, or distribution of Bible has been unofficially criminalized. In 2023, last year, the reporting period we had over 1/3 of the Christian arrests involved charges related to distribution of Bible and evangelical material. The actions highlighted the Iranian government's fear of religious diversity. Religious diversity, not in a sense that you would show tourists, the tourists, historical churches and historical buildings that are restricted or closed to most Christians, especially to those who speak the national language of Persian. Not only 300, you could have 1,000 churches, but if they are restricted to be accessed by the Iranians, that is not a sign of religious diversity. They're just buildings for touristic purposes. but religious diversity where freedom of religion and belief is enjoyed by all citizens, which includes the right to adopt a religion or belief of his choice, and freedom either individually or in community with others, in public, like in churches, or in private, like their privacy of their homes, to manifest their religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. And that no one shall be subjected to coercion and because of their religious or belief of their choice. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the finding of these leaked files are a stark reminder of the Iranian government's systematic denial of religious freedom to Christians as well as other religious minorities. Despite their attempts to deny these abuses, these files stand as irrefutable evidence of a campaign to silence religious minority and control beliefs. This is not just a matter of human rights advocates, it's a matter of global conscience. We must ensure that these abuses are not met with silence, and as members of civil society and international community, we have a duty to amplify the voices of the oppressed, document their stories, and demand accountability from those who commit this violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mansour. In a slight switch up on the panel, we're now going to hear a video statement from the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, who goes into a little bit more detail about the human cost of some of these violations. But I'm just going to go and assist with some technology.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by expressing my thanks to Article 18, Open Doors, Middle East Concern, and Christian Solidarity Worldwide for this side event, and also for the publication of the 2025 annual report, The Tip of the Iceberg. This report reiterates the distinction being drawn by the Islamic Republic of Iran between ethnic Christians and others, especially of converts. This is despite the fact that, as the report notes, Christian converts from a Muslim background are numerically the largest Christian community in Iran. But, as we all know, they are not recognized by the state and are frequently targeted by the authorities. The report notes the heavy sentencing against Christians, with 96 Christians sentenced to a combined 260 years in prison, 37 years in internal exile, and some $800,000 in fines over the last year. This is a colossal sum everywhere, but especially in Iran, in the context of extreme economic austerity. Beyond the totality of these figures, these accounts, and the details of the report, there are, of course, the human stories that one needs to focus in on in order to even try to grasp the terrible human cost of the last year. Let's just focus in on one account, for example, that of Mr. Ebrahim Firouzi, who tragically died at age 37 back in February 2024. He had originally been arrested in 2011 when he would have been around 24 years old for involvement in a house church, possession of Bibles, and promoting Christianity. Having spent 6 years in prison, he was then exiled for 2 years, more than 1,000 miles from his home, in internal exile. His body was found in his flat by his brothers. And let's just spend one moment to think of the tragic pain of that discovery. Heavy bails, heavy sentences, refusal of prison leave, which runs counter even to the Iranian prison law, followed by distant exiles on release, are replicated across a number of the cases that your report logs. It is for compelling reasons such as this that the next report of this mandate on freedom of religion or belief will focus on freedom of religion or belief and the prohibition of torture and other inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Whilst we look at the sentences, the pain, the violations in this report, a number of them can rightly be recognized as being violative also of the prohibition of torture and inhuman and degrading treatment. Your report observes the stark statistic that over 70% of the charges against Christians in 2024 were filed under the amended Article 500. The report further draws from the leaked files from the Tehran District Judiciary that the charges used most frequently against Christians related to propaganda against the Islamic State under Article 500, followed by membership or leadership of anti-security groups under Articles 498 and 499 of the Islamic Penal Code. And for anti-security groups, read house churches. These and other provisions of the Islamic Penal Code effectively serve to criminalize key protections of freedom of religious belief under international human rights law. Amended Articles 499 and 500 were added to Chapter 1 of the Book of Tazirat of the Islamic Penal Code in order to define punishments for, quote, perverse sects. These are sects, groups, or societies considered to have, quote, deviant educational or propagation activities, contradictory or detrimental, allegedly, to the holy religion of Islam. Financing or supporting these groups aggravates the crime and increases the punishment. So under 499 bis, whereas the punishment is 5 years, if there has been receipt of financial or organizational help from outside the country, this is doubled to 10 years imprisonment, and similarly for Article 500 bis. The property of the leaders or financial providers of such groups can and are readily confiscated for the benefit of the Iranian treasury, and the report details that in the past year, amended Article 500 was used by judges to issue confiscation orders for Christian properties and vehicles in at least 2 cases. Now, your report is called the tip of the iceberg, and that would be 10% of the iceberg above the surface of the water and 90% beneath. I suspect that we're actually seeing so much less than 10% of the sufferings endured over the past year, despite the hard work and good presentation of your report. Let's just reflect on the pain of internal exile, the separation of children from parents, the lives lost, the anguish of mothers, the incredulity of suffering, interrogation, and criminalization for mere exercise of freedom of religious belief. This and so much more just cannot be captured in words and infographs. But to the extent that it can, this report is highly informative, and I warmly thank you for it.
We thank Nazila for her contribution there as Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. I think her remarks powerfully reflect the calculated nature of the Iranian authorities and the way that, as she described, we've talked about the difference between what's on paper and the lived realities, the legal framework and the lived realities. But I think the Special Rapporteur has also helped illustrate that within the legal framework itself, if you read between the lines, how it's interpreted and how it is used to discriminate against religious minorities, including Christian communities in Iran. It's a really stark reminder, and we thank her for bringing back into the focus the lived realities, the stories, the individual stories, the suffering that occurs on a daily basis, the 90% that's below the water of the iceberg. The vast amount that we see. We're going to turn to our final panelist, Mr. Patrick Conway, who's we've heard a lot of testimony today, research reporting, the documentation of the violations that are taking place in Iran for Christians of both recognised and unrecognised groups. But it's what we do with this information, this research, these testimonies, that really matters, converting it into action, and particularly here in Geneva and elsewhere in the international community. And the UPR is a really important tool for that. It's a tool in the arsenal, and recommendations on the right to freedom of religion or belief are absolutely vital. And freedom of religion or belief is often described as a touchstone right, a litmus test. It's often abused together with other rights, such as the right to freedom of expression, assembly and association, the right to education and so forth. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Patrick Conway, to share more about kind of the UPR process, our recommendations to the fourth cycle, and just by way of introduction, Mr. Patrick Conway is a lawyer and the Advocacy and Development Manager at Middle East Concern. Middle East Concern was founded in 1991 and seeks to promote freedom of religion or belief in the Middle East and North Africa with a focus on the Christian communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and everybody. I will speak firstly as to recommendations and requirements for the Iranian authorities in order for Iran to meet its international human rights law obligations. In this sense, I will highlight some of the recommendations outlined by Article 18, CSW, Middle East Concern, and Open Doors across the organization's latest annual report that we've heard about, as was published this month, and also in their joint stakeholder report as submitted to the Universal Periodic Review Working Group last July. Both reports concern state-led rights violations against Christians in Iran. Firstly, that the Iranian authorities respect and protect the human rights of everyone in Iran, the rights as enshrined in international law, including the right to freedom of religion or belief, as provided for under Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the right of peaceful assembly under Article 21 ICCPR, regardless of people's religious, ethnic, or linguistic background or status. Further, that the authorities promptly release all Christians who are detained in connection with peaceful religious activities, whether they are detained connected with investigations or criminal charges or serving a prison sentence. Currently, at least 18 Christians are in prison under sentences related to peaceful faith-related activities. They include Hakop Gokhomian, an Armenian citizen from a Christian background who is serving a 10-year prison sentence at Evin Prison. He has now not seen his family for the last 2 Christmases. He was sentenced for alleged deviant proselytizing activity. His conviction was reportedly based exclusively on his possession of 7 Persian language New Testaments and visits to 2 Armenian churches and a Persian language house church while on holiday in Tehran. Those currently imprisoned under sentences also include Mina Kajabi, who is serving a 6-year prison sentence at Evin Prison for allegedly, in quotes, acting against national security by promoting Zionist Christianity. This is through alleged leadership of a house church. She is a lady in her 60s who has metal plates fitted in one of her ankles, who suffers from arthritis and is struggling with pain. In prison, she is not receiving the medication or medical care that she requires, and she has been in prison now at this point for over a year. Further, that the Iranian authorities allow Christians of all religious, linguistic, and ethnic backgrounds to gather freely and collectively. In this sense, that the authorities cease the criminalization of house church organization and membership and allow all Christians to simply have places where they can gather together for peaceful religious purposes. And further, that the authorities allow Christian services for all Christians to be held in a language of their choosing, including in the Persian language. Further, that the Iranian authorities return places of worship and other properties and material confiscated from Christians in connection with peaceful faith practices, and permit the reopening of those churches forcibly closed in connection with the attendance of Christian converts and holding services in the Persian language. For instance, the Assemblies of God Central Church in Tehran was forcibly closed in 2013 and remains closed and inaccessible. Other Assemblies of God churches in other Iranian cities have also been forced to close. Those churches faced more and more restrictions on operations, including days on which they could or could not operate, and demand to provide lists of church members until finally being closed in connection with holding Persian language services. Presbyterian churches, for example, remain open to worshippers, but with significant restrictions. For Iranians, only Christians who are of Armenian and Assyrian backgrounds are permitted by the authorities to attend these churches, and these churches are not permitted to have services in Persian. Additionally, that the authorities permit the reopening of 4 Anglican churches closed during the COVID-19 pandemic for public health reasons. These were the only Persian language churches that remained in operation in Iran, albeit the churches were prohibited by the authorities from accepting new members. Unlike other places of worship that were closed during the pandemic, these churches have yet to be permitted to reopen even now. Additionally, that the state afford recognition to and protect the human rights of all Christians, and not only ethnic Armenians, Assyrians, and the small community of expatriate Christians, whom, as we have heard, are afforded limited protections. And that the authorities set about amending Article 13 of the Iranian Constitution to conform with international law, including as to Article 18 ICCPR, in this sense that protections be expanded to people of all faiths and beliefs. Additionally, that the authorities guarantee access to legal counsel of their choosing, to include for Christians charged with alleged national security related crimes. Further, that the authorities cease to unjustly prosecute and imprison Christians for peaceful faith-related activities, including under trumped-up allegations concerning national security and propaganda against the state. In this sense, it is asked that the Iranian authorities consider that the Christians who are targeted on account of their faith mean no harm to Iran, to its authorities, or to anybody. A common denominator amongst them is that they simply wish to be permitted to practice their faith collectively in a wholly peaceful manner, and to do so in their mother tongue Persian, without facing arrest, prosecution, and lengthy terms of imprisonment, as well as other sanctions. It is asked that the authorities consider that house churches are not political vehicles, are in no way subversive or a threat to national security. Christian converts gather in homes because they are precluded by the state from establishing churches or attending public churches. Iran is unquestionably a country of great beauty and so rich in history and culture, and common to those who are forced to flee Iran due to state-led rights violations and fear of targeting and prison sentences is that they love their country and really wish to remain there. Further, that the Iranian authorities grant access to the country to UN officials who may request it, such as the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, allowing such officials unhindered access to assess compliance with international human rights law. I will now speak as to recommendations/requests concerning UN processes and mechanisms. It is asked that the Universal Periodic Review Working Group raise these rights violations during the Universal Periodic Review concerning Iran. We, of course, acknowledge the importance of all human rights matters and ask that, amongst other matters, the working group raise and afford due weight to these serious and long-standing rights violations that are well documented. And it is asked that these violations be consistently raised through UN mechanisms, including the Human Rights Council, with the authorities in Iran and afforded due weight in reports and other dialogue, including of office holders under relevant special procedures of the Human Rights Council. In closing, I'll speak briefly as to requests of the international community more generally. It is asked that governments and government officials and parliamentarians internationally raise and highlight these rights violations through the UN and otherwise in dialogue with the Iranian authorities. Lastly, third countries hosting Iranian Christians who fled and have applied for asylum are encouraged to assess these applications with due diligence, recognizing the well-founded fears of Christians of experiencing serious rights violations if forced to return to Iran. Thank you.
Yeah, as we've just heard, many of these, well, all of these recommendations are in line with Iran's commitment to the ICCPR and other international covenants. And I just wanted to point out that Iran only accepted 4 out of 30 recommendations during the last UPR relating to freedom of religion or belief. So that's a really stark reminder of Iran's lack of commitment and lack of interest in upholding the right to freedom of religion or belief in law and in practice. It's just ensuring as well. I thank you, Patrick, for raising this. The consistently raising recommendations through both the UPR and also through other mechanisms in the UN system. And we do encourage you as states and as civil society representatives here today to consistently be raising these recommendations. Even if you feel like they're falling on deaf ears, it is important that we continue to hold the Iranian authorities to account and that we continue to ensure that the spotlight is being shone on these violations. That's partly our aim here today, is both to help highlight some of these concerns, these narratives, these trends, but also to encourage you to keep going. Do not give up, do not lose hope, to keep going. Please keep using the UPR as a tool through whichever recommendations you raise, but we do encourage you to include freedom of religion or belief recommendations because they are such a touchstone type of recommendation that incorporates so many other issues, the right to freedom of expression, assembly, association, examples. We're under no illusions as well that the UPR process is somewhat limited in its scope, and that's because it's a peer-to-peer review process, and where at the end of the day there's little recourse for unimplemented or rejected recommendations. So I'm actually going to kickstart with the panel discussion with my own question, just to get the ball rolling, and just ask what kind of multifaceted response is required from the international community. Like, the UPR is an important mechanism, but what other accountability mechanisms should be used? What do you feel is needed more from those here in Geneva? I don't know who wants to kickstart that off. I'm looking at Dr. Gondway at the end. And then I'll take questions from the floor. Thank you.
In every dialogue, in every arena, wherever there's engagement with the Islamic Republic, there should be discussion on improving their human rights record. People shouldn't shy away from this. Secondly, I would say already a lot of nations have their own what's called Magnitsky sanctions. And it might be worth, I know that quite a few Iranian officials have been sanctioned by different countries, but it might be worth looking again and renewing it for those which are, the new or upcoming ones who are just as egregious or even worse than the ones that have already been sanctioned. So you can approach it with a carrot and stick kind of approach. That the sanctions on the one hand, and then the discussions, the deep, in-depth and unrestricted discussions of how they can improve their human rights record, and even offering the assistance with that kind of improvement. For example, the OHCHR could help with formulating or reformulating, amending laws so that they actually meet with international standards, offering that kind of assistance if Iran will allow it. So these are different mechanisms that come to mind immediately, but I'm sure somebody else on this panel might be thinking of others. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I think we will conclude there in the interest of time, but we thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you leave with us today with a better understanding of the situation for both recognised and unrecognised Christian minority groups in Iran, and information with which to counter the narratives of the Islamic Republic of Iran officials that Christians in the country face no restrictions on their enjoyment to freedom of religion or belief. We also hope that you're equipped with a better appreciation for the importance of nuanced and targeted recommendations for both recognised and unrecognised Christian communities in Iran. And we also hope that this event stands to complement the event hosted by the Baha'i international community earlier this week, as these abuses also affect members of other religious minorities. So thank you.